He told me I'd never be more than a mechanic, but I built the very car that made me a billionaire. What happens next will leave you speechless. He looked at me across the shop floor, the smell of oil and burnt rubber hanging heavy in the air, and said it with a laugh that cut sharper than a blade. You'll never be more than a mechanic. The words didn't come with anger, but worse, they came with certainty. His tone was casual, almost dismissive, like he wasn't trying to wound me at all, just telling me what he thought was a fact of life. That made it cut deeper than any insult ever could. His mouth curled into a half-smile as he spoke, a smirk that said he believed what he had just told me was undeniable truth. I had grease coating my hands, black streaks running down my fingers where the oil had seeped in. My shirt clung to my back with sweat, the fabric stiff from days of wear, and the engine block in front of me sat unfinished, parts laid out in neat rows across the bench. The smell of fuel clung to the air, mixed with the faint bitterness of overheated metal. My head throbbed with exhaustion, but it wasn't fatigue that kept me frozen in that moment. It was him, and the sentence he had just delivered. I wanted to speak. I wanted to raise my head, lock eyes with him, and tell him he was wrong. I wanted to point to the folded stack of papers in my back pocket, sketches of an engine design I had been building in my mind for years. But instead, I stayed still. My throat tightened, my chest heavy, and the words died before they reached my tongue. I only nodded once, slowly, as though his judgment meant nothing, and I reached for a rag to wipe my hands. My movements were steady, almost deliberate, because if I allowed even the smallest tremor, he would see how much his words mattered to me. I forced my face into calmness, though inside I could feel fire licking at the edges of my thoughts. He didn't notice, or maybe he didn't care. He was my boss then, my mentor, if you could call him that. I had worked under him for years, watching how he carried himself, how his words bent men into obedience, how his presence dominated every corner of the shop. I had studied him, trusted him, even admired him in a way I would never admit aloud. He had taught me how to tighten bolts until the torque felt like instinct, how to listen to the cough of an engine and know where its sickness hid. For that, I had been grateful. But in that moment, with a single sentence, he had revealed what he truly thought of me. Not a partner, not an equal, not even a man with potential. Just a pair of hands, strong enough to work, dumb enough to keep quiet, replaceable when the muscles wore out. I remember the lights above us humming faintly, flickering every so often as if even the wiring of the shop was tired of serving him. I remember the sound of a single drop of oil hitting the concrete floor with a slow plink, echoing louder in the silence that followed his words. I remember the faint scrape of his boots as he turned away, already done with me, already sure his truth had been spoken and accepted. He didn't just insult me, he defined me. At least, that's what he thought, and I let him believe I accepted it. That night, after the shop closed and the streets had gone quiet, I sat alone at my kitchen table. The clock ticked faintly on the wall, the refrigerator hummed in the corner, and the only other sound was the faint scratch of paper as I spread out my sketches across the wood. Years of drawings, engines that didn't exist, cars that only lived in my imagination, pieces of paper stained with smudges of graphite and oil. To him, they were nothing more than doodles. Wasted time, childish fantasies. But as I stared at them, the curves and lines and numbers glowing faintly under the dim light bulb, I knew what they were. They were maps. They were blueprints of something far larger than a job, larger than a paycheck, larger than the small world he had tried to trap me inside. They were freedom. I traced my finger over one of the designs, following the path of the lines I had memorized 100 times before. I could almost hear the engine roaring, feel the vibrations through the steering wheel, see the look on people's faces when they realized a machine like this could exist. But then his words came back, sharp and clear, echoing against the walls of my chest. You'll never be more than a mechanic. I closed my eyes and let the weight of it sink in. For hours, I sat there, the sketches spread out around me like a battlefield. My chest rose and fell slowly, my fists clenching and unclenching against the table, the quiet hum of the refrigerator reminding me how small and ordinary my life was in that moment. I didn't sleep. I couldn't. His voice chased me into every corner of my thoughts. Each time I shut my eyes, I saw his smirk, heard his tone, felt the certainty in his words. He had spoken like a man delivering a sentence, like a judge deciding a fate. But as the hours stretched on, as dawn began to creep in through the blinds, I realized something. His words were not a sentence. They were a challenge. I didn't argue with him then. I didn't confront him. I didn't waste my voice shouting against a man who was deaf to anything beyond his own arrogance. Instead, I decided something far quieter and far more dangerous. I would not fight him with anger. I would not beg him for recognition. I would not waste my time trying to convince him. I would make him eat those words, not with shouting, not with fists, but with silence, patience, and proof. And when the time came, when the machine I dreamed of finally lived and breathed beneath my hands, I would let it speak for me. Until then, I would carry his sentence like fuel in my veins. I would make him eat those words, not with shouting, not with fists, but with silence, patience, and proof. The years that followed felt like walking under a long shadow. He carried himself with arrogance, strutting through the shop like a king among peasants. His boots would slam against the concrete with each step, echoing louder than the machines, as though even the floor bowed under his weight. He barked orders like a drill sergeant, his voice rough, filled with the smugness of a man who thought authority was the same as respect. And the men around him, most of them tired, most of them afraid of losing their jobs, scrambled to obey. They laughed when he laughed, even when the joke was cruel. They nodded when he spoke, even when the words were nonsense. I stayed quiet. I kept my head down, hands steady on the work. I learned in silence, taking in everything. The way he cut corners when no one was watching, the way he lied to clients with a smile, the way he puffed out his chest when bragging about work he hadn't done. Every insult he threw my way, every time he dismissed me as the boy with the tools, every time he reminded me in front of others that I was nothing more than a mechanic, it all became fuel. There was one afternoon I'll never forget, deep in winter. The shop was cold, the air smelling of stale coffee and gasoline, our breath fogging in the chill. During lunch, I sat at the back corner of the room with a pencil in my hand, sketching on scrap paper I had hidden inside an old parts manual. My fingers moved quickly, lines forming into the shape of a new intake system I had been dreaming about for weeks. The pencil left streaks of graphite smudged on my palms, but I didn't care. In those sketches, I felt alive, like the world around me disappeared and only the machine in my mind mattered. He saw me. His boots thudded toward my table, and before I could fold the paper away, his hand snatched it from under mine. He glanced down, eyes narrowing, then gave a short laugh. "You really think anyone would drive this?" he said, his voice loud enough for the men nearby to hear. His smirk stretched wide, lips curled in mock amusement, and his eyes flicked between me and the sketch like I was a child who had scribbled nonsense. I said nothing. My chest tightened, but my face stayed still. "You're good with wrenches, kid, not dreams," he went on, his voice lower now, as if offering me advice. But I could hear the poison beneath it. "Don't waste your time." He crumpled the paper in his fist with a sharp crackle, then tossed it onto the floor like trash. The sound it made when it hit the concrete was louder in my ears than the whir of tools and chatter of the men. I bent down, picked it up, and smoothed the wrinkles with steady fingers. I didn't meet his eyes. I didn't speak. My silence annoyed him more than words ever could, and I saw it. The flicker in his expression as he turned away, muttering something under his breath. But inside me, something tightened. That wasn't the first time he had cut me down, and it wouldn't be the last. Years later, another memory carved itself into me. We were in the shop with two wealthy clients, men with sharp suits and sharper wallets. He had just unveiled a small modification I had worked on for months, a fix that made one of our older models run smoother than ever. The clients marveled at it, asking questions, leaning in with excitement. He stood tall, smiling, and answered as though every bit of it had been his idea. "That's the kind of innovation we pride ourselves on," he said, his voice dripping with confidence. He never looked at me, not even once, but I felt his eyes on me all the same, like a warning, like a dare. "Say nothing. Don't challenge me." And I didn't. I stood in the corner, hands folded behind me, and let him take the credit. My silence was a mask, and behind it, I was recording every detail in memory. It was in moments like that I learned something powerful. Silence wasn't weakness. Silence was a weapon. Men like him thrived on noise, boasts, lies, threats, praise. They mistook quiet for submission, mistook my calm for emptiness. They didn't see me listening. They didn't see me learning. They didn't see me building. The truth was, I had already started working in secret. Every night after the shop lights went out, I returned home to my small garage, no bigger than a storage shed, with its cracked cement floor and rusted roof that whined when the wind hit it. I would flick on the bare light bulb hanging from a cord and work until my hands went numb. My savings were pitiful, but I hoarded every spare dollar, trading meals for parts, scavenging through junkyards, buying scraps that no one else wanted. I welded frames with my own hands, sparks lighting the walls like fireflies. I tore down engines until I understood them piece by piece, bolt by bolt. The first machines I built were failures, engines that rattled themselves apart, frames that collapsed under their own weight, electrical systems that smoked and hissed. I cursed under my breath when pistons cracked, when metal warped, when hours of work ended in silence and failure. But every failure was a teacher. Every mistake pointed me toward what worked and what didn't. I kept notes, pages and pages of calculations, sketches filled with adjustments, margins crowded with ideas scrawled in half-sleep. My garage became my real classroom, the one he could never lock me out of. Meanwhile, in the shop, I began to notice cracks forming in his empire. He still strutted like a king, but his crown was slipping. His debts whispered through town like smoke. Suppliers muttered about unpaid bills. I saw the way his hands sometimes trembled when he thought no one was watching, the way he clutched his coffee cup like it was the only thing keeping him steady. The men who worked for him grumbled more, though never too loudly. Some left. Some stayed out of fear. And he drank more, I could tell. His eyes were bloodshot in the mornings, his breath sour, his temper quicker to spark. I paid attention to all of it. I filed every detail away, piece by piece, because I knew a time would come when his shadow would no longer cover me. I watched. I waited. I learned. And in the darkness of my small garage, with oil on my hands and silence as my shield, the machine I was building in secret began to take shape, not just as a thing of steel and fire, but as my answer to every word he had ever spoken. And as the years stretched on, the car I was building in secret began to take shape, not just as a machine of steel and fire, but as my answer to every word he had ever spoken. The night I finished it, my hands wouldn't stop shaking. The garage smelled of oil, metal, and a faint trace of burnt rubber, but to me it was sweeter than perfume. Under the buzzing overhead light, the car sat like something alive, sleek, defiant, waiting. It wasn't just a machine, it was a vessel that carried every insult, every dismissal, every locked door I'd ever faced. I circled it slowly, dragging my fingertips along the hood as though it were skin. The paint gleamed under the dim bulbs, dark as midnight, yet sharp as a blade. I slid into the seat, my chest tight with anticipation. The leather was rough, unpolished, but it held me like it had been waiting only for me. My fingers hovered over the key for a moment. I whispered to myself, "Let's see if you breathe." Then I twisted it. The roar that came alive wasn't just an engine. It was a voice, one louder and clearer than I had ever managed on my own. It filled the garage, rattled the shelves, and echoed in my ribs until I thought my bones would shatter. I gripped the wheel, eyes stinging, and whispered through clenched teeth, "You're mine." That first night, I didn't tell a soul. I drove into the empty streets, the world asleep, my secret cradled between my hands. Every turn was a test, every acceleration a question, and every answer made my heart pound harder. The tires bit into corners like claws, the frame held steady as though defying gravity, and the beast under the hood begged me to push harder. I could feel its hunger, and, for the first time in my life, I had something that wanted the same thing I did, to prove itself. The nights blurred together after that. I tuned, tested, broke, and rebuilt. Some mornings, I would fall asleep in the driver's seat, my hands blackened with grease, my ears still ringing with the car's voice. I studied how it behaved at every angle, how it danced when I feathered the throttle, how it growled when I demanded more. Each time I thought it couldn't surprise me, it did. And soon, whispers began to spread. It started in the alleys where racers gathered. Men leaned against their hoods, cigarettes glowing in the dark, talking about a phantom car tearing through the streets at night. Some claimed it was a myth. Others swore they'd seen it, headlights slicing through fog, gone before they could catch the plate. One evening, after a race on the outskirts, a man approached me as I tightened a bolt under the hood. He was older, with grease under his nails and the kind of gaze that measured everything. "That yours?" he asked, voice low but edged with awe. I only nodded. He smirked, scratching his chin. "Never seen lines like that. Whoever built it, he knows what he's doing." The words landed heavier than I expected. For a long time, I'd been invisible, just another nameless pair of hands in someone else's shop. But now, someone spoke to me like I mattered. I gave no explanation, only closed the hood and drove off. Still, his words stayed with me all night. Soon, the whispers reached collectors, then investors, men in tailored suits who didn't care about the smell of oil or the thrill of speed. They cared about what it meant: money, power, the future. When I walked into those meetings, I carried nothing but a folder of sketches and the car itself. But I didn't need more. The first time I pulled up outside a glass tower downtown, I caught the look on the valet's face. He froze, eyes wide, then leaned closer as though afraid to touch it. "Sir," he stammered, where did you get this?" "I built it," I said simply, watching the disbelief ripple across his expression. Inside, the men in suits didn't look at me the way the old boss had. They didn't see a nobody. They didn't see grease-stained hands or the lack of a diploma. They saw the car, and the car spoke for me. One deal led to another. A small investment turned into a workshop. The workshop became a factory. And before I could catch my breath, the factory turned into a company with my name etched into contracts, patents, headlines. Every day felt unreal. Yet I never forgot where it had started, in the silence of a dim garage with trembling hands. Sometimes late at night, I would drive past the old shop. The building sagged, the neon sign flickered like it was choking on its last breath, and the parking lot was nearly empty. Through the grimy windows, I could see him pacing, barking orders at the few men stubborn enough to stay. Their faces looked tired, beaten down, the same way mine once had. I never stepped inside. I never knocked. I never needed to. The silence between us was louder than any words. There was a time when I thought revenge would taste sweeter if I confronted him face to face. But standing in the shadows of my own success, I realized I didn't crave his recognition anymore. I had outgrown it. He was still trapped in the same cage he had built for himself, while I had found the key he never even knew existed. The first billion was only a number on a screen, yet when it appeared, I stared at it for hours. Not because of the money itself, but because of what it meant. I wasn't angry anymore. I wasn't chasing a shadow. I was free. That night, sitting alone in my office, I thought of him. The man who had laughed at me, who had told me I'd never be more than the grease under his boots. I didn't feel hate. I didn't even feel triumph. I felt pity, because in his cruelty, he had given me the one thing he never intended, the fire to build a world without him. I leaned back in my chair, hands folded, watching the city lights flicker below. My reflection stared back from the glass, older, sharper, unrecognizable from the boy who once worked in silence. My voice was calm as I whispered to the empty room. He had given me the fire without knowing it. His words had been a cage, but I had used them as bricks to build something far greater. I saw him once more, years later. It was strange how life sometimes arranged a moment like a stage play, every detail waiting in silence for me to step into it. I had just pulled into town, the late afternoon sun bending long shadows across the cracked pavement, when my eyes caught him. He was sitting outside the same old shop, the bench sagging beneath his weight, the wood chipped and gray. The shop looked tired, like it hadn't seen a fresh coat of paint in decades. The sign above the door tilted slightly, its edges rusted, its once proud lettering flaking away. Even the air around it felt different, stale, like the smell of oil and dust that clung to places forgotten. And there he was. He looked smaller, not just in body, but in spirit, His shoulders hunched forward, his frame narrow, his shirt stained with grease and time. His hair, once thick and dark, had thinned into wiry strands streaked with gray. He wasn't the man who used to tower over me, with his voice sharp and cutting. He wasn't the man whose laughter echoed when he told me what I'd never be. He was diminished. For a second, he didn't notice me. He just stared at the ground, lost in some thought that bent his brow into a tired frown. Then his eyes lifted, and they found mine. Our gazes locked. It was the kind of moment that seemed to stretch, a silence that carried the weight of all the years between us. His lips parted just slightly, his throat moving as though words were fighting to be spoken. An apology? A defense? Maybe just another insult? But nothing came. His eyes lingered on me, searching, caught between recognition and disbelief. I eased the car to a stop across the street. Not just any car, the car. The very machine I had poured my soul into, the design that had carried me beyond this small town, beyond the limits he once tried to carve into me. Its engine purred low, steady, confident. Polished chrome gleamed in the sunlight, reflecting the sky in a way that almost made the car look alive. I didn't have to say a word. He knew. I saw it hit him. First confusion, then realization, and finally disbelief that darkened into something else, something he couldn't hide. His eyes widened, then narrowed. His chest rose unevenly, like the air itself had betrayed him. His fingers curled against the bench, trembling slightly, as though trying to grip something solid before it slipped away. The silence between us carried everything. I thought about rolling down the window, thought about giving him the speech I once rehearsed in my head on countless nights. How wrong he was, how far I had gone, how his words had been fuel instead of shackles. But the truth was I didn't need to. Words would only cheapen it. Instead, I sat there, my hand resting lightly on the leather steering wheel, the hum of the engine filling the space where his laughter used to echo. My success wasn't loud. It wasn't a shout. It was this quiet presence, undeniable and untouchable. He blinked first. His gaze dropped to the car, tracing the lines, the detail, the perfection of something he once swore I'd never create. I could almost hear his thoughts unraveling, could almost feel the weight pressing down on him as he realized what patience and silence had built. A man across the street came out of a diner, pausing mid-step to stare at the car. He let out a low whistle. "That's a beauty," he muttered to himself, loud enough for anyone nearby to hear. He didn't even notice the man on the bench. His eyes were on me, on the car. The man from my past shifted, his jaw tightening. That little comment from a stranger had done more damage than anything I could have said. It reminded him he was invisible now, overshadowed by what I had become. I leaned back against the seat, steadying my breath. My mind drifted, unbidden, to the nights when I worked until my hands bled, when the smell of steel and gasoline filled my lungs, and the only light came from the garage lamps overhead. I remembered sketching blueprints on worn paper, erasing, redrawing, chasing perfection. His words had been there too, echoing in the corners of my mind, pushing me harder than any encouragement ever could. And now, here we were. For one fleeting moment, I thought I saw something in his eyes. Not anger, not pride, but sorrow. A shadow of a man who realized too late what cruelty had cost him. He looked like he wanted to speak, but the silence held him hostage. I didn't wave. I didn't roll down the window. I didn't need to. I let the moment breathe, let him sit with it. Let him face the quiet revenge that no flame or fist could ever match. Then, without hurry, I pressed my foot against the pedal. The engine growled deeper, a sound that seemed to fill the street, bouncing off the walls of the buildings. His eyes followed me, and I knew that sound would haunt him long after I left. The car rolled forward, slow at first, then steady. The town faded in the rearview mirror, but his image lingered, small, shrunken, silent on that bench, swallowed by everything he had once claimed as his kingdom. I realized then that revenge didn't come the way I once thought it might. It wasn't fire or fists, wasn't shouts or victories shouted in the streets. No, revenge came like this. Quiet, steady, in the truth he couldn't escape. that I had become everything he said I'd never be, while he had become nothing more than a ghost of himself. I didn't ruin him. He had ruined himself. All I had done was refuse to let his voice define me. As the road opened ahead, the town shrinking behind me, I felt lighter. I didn't remember his laughter anymore, nor the sting of his insults. What I remembered were the nights alone in the garage, the hum of machines, the sketches that became blueprints, the blueprints that became steel, and the steel that became my voice. And when I thought of him again, it wasn't with hate. It was with silence. A silence stronger than any curse, heavier than any blow. He told me I'd never be more than a mechanic, and I built the car that made me a billionaire. Disclaimer: the story you just watched is fictional. It explores powerful themes of underestimated talent, defiance in the face of judgment, and the ultimate triumph over doubt. This narrative aims to highlight the importance of believing in yourself and to inspire a deeper appreciation for the value of hard work and quiet ambition.